Coming up today, furious with the president's decision to veto a controversial law, the leader of the main opposition accuses the president of stirring up political friction and deflecting her own administration's shortcomings onto the National Assembly. In one of its harshest assessments yet, the United States labels North Korea's human rights record among the worst in the world. Plus, South Korea and Japan failed to reach a compromise over Seoul's ban on fishery imports from areas affected by the Fukushima nuclear disaster. Stay tuned for these stories and more. Hello, it's noon on Friday, the 26th of June. You're tuned in to our midday newscast here on Arirang TV. Thank you for joining us. I'm Mark Broome. Our top story this afternoon. The leader of Korea's main opposition party has slammed President Park Geun-hye's decision to veto a revised parliamentary law. Moon Jae-in, chairman of the New Politics Alliance for Democracy, issued a public notice around an hour ago accusing the presidential office of fueling political strife by striking down the law that sought to expand Parliament's influence over executive ordinances. Moon said the president should apologise for the government's poor initial handling of the MERS outbreak rather than disregarding the National Assembly and threatening democracy. He added that the president's veto violates the spirit of the Constitution, as it also violates the National Assembly's legislative duties. The main opposition party has declared an all-out boycott of Assembly schedules until Parliament holds a re-vote. However, the ruling party says it will not consider a re-vote on the vetoed law. Now for the latest on the outbreak of Middle East respiratory syndrome here in Korea, and one more case was confirmed today, lifting the tally to 181, while 2 patients with pre-existing ailments passed away overnight. For more details, we now go over to our Han-Dan. Dan.
Good afternoon, Mark. The latest victim of the deadly virus is a 26-year-old doctor at Samsung Medical Center who had treated patient 135 for 5 days earlier this month. He's the 13th member of the Samsung medical staff to have contracted the MERS virus. Also, Korea's health ministry says 2 patients already suffering from diabetes and bladder cancer passed away. They were aged 79 and 80. So far, the fatality rate is 17.1%, with about 93% of the deceased being high-risk patients with pre-existing illnesses. The number of quarantined seemed to be in decline, but spiked to more than 2,900, while some 260 people were released from quarantine today. 81 patients have fully recovered from MERS. All but 13 patients undergoing treatment are in a stable condition. We'll have more MERS update in our evening news. Mark.
Now, South Korea has slapped fresh financial sanctions on 7 foreign individuals and institutions for trading arms with North Korea. The Foreign Ministry said Friday that 3 Taiwanese nationals and 3 Taiwanese institutions, Global Interface Company, Transmerits and Transmultimechanics, have been blacklisted. Syria's Scientific Studies and Research Centre was also added to the list. Currently, they are not affected by the UN sanctions on Pyongyang. Under the latest measure, which is based on the country's foreign currency transactions law, South Korean nationals and businesses must receive approval from the Bank of Korea governor for financial transactions with the 7 individuals and entities. The United States has labelled North Korea's human rights record among the worst in the world. Washington's worst ever assessment of Pyongyang's treatment of its own people shows it took a key UN report on the issue into account. Connie Kim reports.
The U.S. government has lowered its already grim assessment of North Korea's human rights record, saying the regime's treatment of its people remains among the worst in the world. The U.S. State Department's country reports on human rights practices for 2014, released on Thursday, said the regime commits systematic, widespread, and gross human rights violations, and such violations constitute crimes against humanity. A U.S. official says Washington will continue to shine the spotlight on the North's abuses.
We are doing everything we can to try to get knowledge and information to the people of North Korea so that this trend continues.
The report reveals stories of public executions and unimaginable torture, such as locking prisoners in a tiny room for weeks on end. Parts were gleaned from the UN Commission of Inquiry's report, hinting that Washington had taken that report into consideration for the first time. The UN's 370-page report, published last February, outlined the regime's human rights abuses, including torture and arbitrary imprisonment. It also recommended the regime's leadership, including Kim Jong-un, be referred to the International Criminal Court for crimes against humanity. For years now, Washington's assessment of North Korea's human rights record has consistently been labeled as grim, deplorable, and poor. Connie Kim, Arirang News.
A senior U.S. military official has reiterated that Washington is considering the permanent stationing of a Terminal High-Altitude Area Defense, or THAAD, unit to South Korea. Speaking to reporters after an Atlantic Council conference on missile defense in Washington on Thursday local time, U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for Arms Control Frank Rose said their position regarding the need for THAAD deployment to the Korean Peninsula remains unchanged, but added no decisions have been made, nor have any official discussions been held with Seoul. U.S. Deputy Under-Secretary of Defense Brian McKeon, who also attended the conference, echoed the statement, saying the potential deployment of its missile defense system does not target China or Russia, but is primarily aimed at protecting Washington's military forces from missile threats posed by North Korea. South Korea is exporting locally developed howitzers to Poland, continuing its foray into the European arms market. The Defence Agency for Technology and Quality and Samsung Techwin held a delivery ceremony for the first K9 howitzer shipment on Friday in Gyeongsangnam-do province. Now, Samsung Techwin finalised a deal with Poland last December for 120 units of these howitzers. The Korean defence company will directly supply 24 howitzers through 2017, with the remaining 96 to be produced in Poland. The total export value is an estimated $310 million. This is Korea's second export of the K9 howitzers after a 2001 deal with Turkey. Korea and Japan have wrapped up a two-day meeting in Geneva discussing Seoul's import ban on Japanese fish products. The talks failed to produce an agreement, however, as Korea rejected Tokyo's request to lift restrictions. Gwon-soo reports.
Korea and Japan continue to disagree on the safety issues regarding Japanese fisheries, which has been ongoing more than 4 years now.
This traditional fish market in Seoul was one of the places affected most by Japan's nuclear disaster in 2011.
The effects of radiation don't appear until 5, 10, 15 or 20 years after eating contaminated food. Wouldn't you be afraid?
Things improved for the domestic fish market after the Korean government's ban of fish imports from 8 prefectures near the Fukushima nuclear plant. However, with Japan taking the issue to the World Trade Organization, concerns are mounting that Seoul will concede Tokyo's request to lift the restrictions. After the two-day meeting, Korea's trade, fisheries, and food ministers merely reaffirmed their stance that the ban is necessary for people's safety and asked their Japanese counterparts for clear information about the crippled nuclear plant. Japan claims that Korea is violating the WTO's SPS, or Sanitary and Phytosanitary Agreement, claiming lack of scientific explanation. Korea denied the claim, but experts say both countries need stronger data to solve the issue.
The argument will prolong for some time. Technical discussions are required on issues like the degree of water contamination, since even Japanese citizens remain concerned.
It's now likely that a WTO settlement panel will be charged with putting an end to the dispute, which could last at least a year, or, according to Korean officials, possibly up to 8 years. Kwon-soo, Arirang News.
Staying on the import-export front, and Korea may soon lift its 6-month-long ban on poultry imports from the Netherlands. The Agriculture Ministry said on Friday that the imports of Dutch chicken and duck meat could resume as early as next month, following approval by related agencies and specialists. Now, no additional cases of bird flu have been reported to date since the end of the outbreak late last year. In December, Seoul discontinued imports of poultry as well as avian pets as a quarantine measure to prevent the spread of avian flu that was reported in the Netherlands. Last year alone, Korea imported over 140 tons of chicken from the Netherlands, which is Korea's 5th largest meat supplier. Apple's highly anticipated smartwatch, the Apple Watch, has finally been launched here in Korea some 2 months after its release in other major markets. Despite the hype, industry watchers are not so sure whether the smartwatch will be as indispensable as the smartphone and go on to become a mainstream device. Our Kim Ji-yeon reports.
Pouring rain was not enough to dampen the spirits of people gathered outside this Apple store in Seoul's shopping district of Myeongdong. Arriving before the crack of dawn, they were there to ensure they got their hands on the Apple Watch, which went on local release on Friday.
I came to the store early yesterday and got the first ticket. And I got here at 5:30 a.m. today just to make sure I can buy one.
3 models of the Apple Watch have been released in Korea. The most basic costs $360. The most expensive? Well, that comes with a much heftier price tag.
I'm trying on the $20,000 18-karat gold Apple Watch. At first glance, it doesn't seem as intuitive as the iPhone, and you need some time to understand it. And some of the features, such as fitness tracking, runs without a phone nearby.
The popularity of the Apple Watch was anticipated long before its release, with online malls like auctions saying their stock has already been snapped up. I asked a fan who already owns an Apple Watch about its appeal.
I was worried about the short battery life, but it lasts up to 2 days without additional charging, and I love the design. Other than the part that it requires an iPhone, it's basically perfect.
Despite the fanfare, some local experts aren't entirely convinced.
The Apple Watch is likely to remain as a fashion accessory rather than a tech product for now, as it doesn't do much for the price you pay. Sales estimates for the watch this year have already been slashed from 20 million to 16 million. To take the upper hand, Korean smartwatch makers have to improve the software-related functions and make them more appealing for use in a corporate setting.
The Apple Watch is expected to force Korean rivals Samsung Electronics and LG Electronics to step up their game. Samsung is set to release its newest smartwatch, the Galaxy Gear A, later this year. Kim Ji-yeon, Arirang News.
Now, Korean food or hanshik is enjoying a real boom in popularity around the world these days. And this global awakening to the wide variety of delicious and healthy Korean dishes is being reflected at this year's World Expo in Milan. And Na Hyang-kyung reports.
Era ottimo is what many Italians are saying as they leave the Korea Pavilion after tasting Korean food or hanshik. Korea is one of the 145 countries taking part in this year's Milan World Expo, with food being the main theme of the event. For some, it's a totally new experience, while for others, it's a delightful reunion.
I came to the Korean Pavilion and liked it so much that I decided to stay for lunch. I really enjoy the Korean specialty cuisine and I would recommend it to everybody.
When I visited the Korea Pavilion last week, I really liked it, so I came back today, this time to eat. I like it so much that I think I'll come here again or find a Korean restaurant in Milan to have Korean food.
It hasn't been long since Korean food established its reputation in Italy. Industry experts say it's tough to please the palates of the locals because of the pride and love Italians have for their own cuisine and stronger presence of Japanese and Chinese cuisine. In Milan, for example, the number of Korean restaurants has tripled to about 9 from 6 years ago. However, they did not command much brand power until the expo. The restaurant at the Korea Pavilion has welcomed nearly 30,000 visitors for each of the past 2 months, and the chief manager says educating customers in terms of both plating and flavor of their meal is key.
We arranged the foods on one plate to clearly distinguish the appetizers, main dish, and dessert. We also created a recipe that would slightly reduce the flavor of garlic. It was enough to ease the customers into hanshik, yet maintain its authenticity.
What is certain is that the Milan Expo has stimulated interest in hanshik, but officials here do say that the next crucial step will be to keep this momentum beyond October after the expo ends. 나현경, Arirang News, Milan.
Now I'm just going to give you a brief look at the weather conditions here in Korea, because after a prolonged drought here in the nation, most of the country has been and is still receiving some much-needed rain. This band of precipitation has passed over most of the southern region, and it should stop raining in other regions by late afternoon. However, it's likely to continue raining overnight in Gangwon-do province, and a heavy rain advisory has been issued for parts of Gyeongsang-buk-do province. Now let's take a look at the weather around the world. Well, that's all we have for now. I'm Mark Broome. Have a wonderful weekend, and thank you for tuning in. We really hope to see you at the same time on Monday. Until then.